session for the Raymore City Council for Monday, October the 2nd. We have 5 items on our agenda tonight. First item is performance update, and I'll let Mr. Fearborn take it away.
Thank you, sir. Mike Crass will take it away.
Thank you, Mr. Fearborn, Mr. Mayor, Mr. Member of the Council. Wanted to update you on the performance of the oxygenation system that we installed a couple of years ago. Part of our sewer system is a very, very unique situation where we've got almost 2/3 of the city drains down to a lift station and then pumps through a force main or a pressure main that's almost 15,000 feet long. That is very, very unusual. And so what happens is the sewage sits in that line for an extended period of time. Bacteria grows, and that contributes to not only the odor problem but corrosion problems, because at the discharge point, not only is the gas released, but it also precipitates as sulfuric acid. So we embarked several years ago to look at options to deal with that, and selected an oxygenation system, which what it does is it injects and creates dissolved oxygen within the sewage, which the bacteria then feeds on rather than feeding on the sewage, and therefore we don't have the buildup of hydrogen sulfide. So from time to time we do monitor the performance, and we did earlier this year put the hydrogen sulfide detectors in the main and then discharge point, and are still seeing the same results that we are seeing when the unit first was put online. So when we compare it to the chemical treatment, we continue to have a projected savings of about $130,000 a year, which keeps us on track for the estimated 5-year payback for that equipment. So it's been in service for 2 years, and we still anticipate the continuing performance of it, and see, the projected 5-year payback is definitely within the realm of possibilities. That concludes my report.
Mr. Moorhead.
Mr. Crass, I just want to commend you and your department. I know that, when we were first looking at this is kind of a unique proprietary system. There wasn't a lot of history on this, and I know you guys came to us and kind of said, we have a lot of faith in this, but, we are bearing a slight risk here with entering into the unknown, and the results seem to have been met or exceeded our expectations on that. So the collateral question is, I know that this is not a tested product, so we don't know the true lifespan. Based on your observation of it, are we well into its lifespan? Are we looking to replace it in a few years, or do you think we'll get a few more out of it?
Oh no, I think we'll get considerable life out of it. Really, there's not a lot of moving parts. There's a pump, and pumps have service life, and then there's the electronic controls to monitor the pumps. But the unit itself is just a large stainless steel cone. So it's more of the pump that takes the sewage out of the system and then injects the oxygen into the system. So I see a relatively long service life with this.
Good, thanks.
Anyone else? Ms. Delwood.
Thank you. I think that the graph kind of, I would assume, speaks for itself, but I'm just curious, have we had any complaints from people in those neighborhoods about the odor?
When the unit's running, and it probably runs about 98% of the time, we've had a few little, there are a few little air relief valves that'll go down for a little while that debris has to be cleaned out of, and I can tell you that as soon as the unit goes down, we get calls. But other than that, it's pretty much undetectable. I mean, the levels that we are seeing are, we can barely detect it with our equipment. That's why we have to borrow the equipment from Little Blue Valley to get a kind of a longer measurement period.
Can I ask a follow-up?
Oh, sure.
And so how often do we get calls for that, roughly?
A couple of times a year when we're servicing the unit. That's about it.
Is it a particular time of year when we have a high level of output, or there's
No,
some
it's
infiltration
really-
from the water or whatever?
It's really when we have to take the unit down for maintenance.
I mean,
Yeah.
no, because our system, as I've learned, when we get large rainfalls, we get a lot more infiltration
But Mayor, to follow up
after
on
a
your,
football game. Oh, we're getting out of hand.
Give it up, Mr. Krass. Give it up.
Anything else? If not, we'll move on to mudjacking.
Thank you, sir. This one is also going to be Mr. Krass presenting.
Thank you, Mr. Fearborn, Mr. Mayor, members of council. Council asked for another status update on the mudjacking program, since we've got a little over a year and a half under our belt. We still see this as a very successful program. We completed quite a bit of work last fall. We inspected the work this spring, identified four minor areas that had previously needed to be replaced that we couldn't mudjack. Those are being completed this year. The rest of them performed well over the winter with the freeze-thaw cycle. We are now working in the Brookside area, where to date we've completed about 80 locations and 80 repairs. There's a few areas that we're going around right now that where we've kind of set the program aside for a little bit to do some replacement of some ADA ramps on Lucy Webb and some other locations that had been deteriorated. So we'll be back getting that on again in the fall or shortly here, and probably we'll get about as many locations as we did last year, which was close to about 200. Sorry, that concludes my report, Mayor.
Any questions? Nope. Okay. Thank you, Mike. So we'll move on to the next item, which is the transfer of private infrastructure to city ownership and control. I know, Mr. Holman, you had asked that this be placed on the agenda. You want to take it?
Yes, sir. Thank you very much. We've received a number of these requests over the past, 6 months to a year, maybe even going back a little further than that. And they've come in various forms. We've had the request to take over the lift station at Harold Estates. We know that that Morning View is looking at requesting the city to take over their streets once they can figure all that out. But you also remember that we got a request to take over the cemetery from that group, private infrastructure. We had to go in and take over a number of monument signs that no longer ownership, we couldn't figure out ownership, or there was never any ownership assigned to it, that were crumbling and had to be taken care of. We also had to go in and do some median beautification and cul-de-sac areas where we had white areas, and kind of take care of that stuff as well. And we have, I feel like, we're not unique as a city in that other cities see this as well, but I think as the city ages and improves, I think it's inevitable that we will see more of these requests, especially from older sections of the city. And we have, to this point, I believe as a group, kind of treated these each on an individual basis, with everybody looking at it kind of from their own individual perspective. And so what I thought might be of value to us as a group is to kind of put together some elements of a general policy framework. And I put some stuff down in words. I think Mr. Fearborn went in and corrected my spelling and grammar and a few things like that, but it's essentially the same document. And this is just to start. I kind of wanted to start the conversation, and I'll go ahead and pass these around, if you would. But there are 4 points of the general policy framework as I have proposed right now, and they're really nothing new. There's nothing there that's going to surprise anybody. This is the same stuff that we have probably put in place whenever we considered any of these things in the past, most of it done by staff in advance of it coming to us. But then factors for consideration. I have about 5 listed here that I thought seemed to be pretty reasonable. And again, I wanted to get a little bit of input on this. For those of you that have not served on planning and zoning, when planning and zoning gets a recommendation or a request rather for a rezoning or a final plat or preliminary plat, staff does an outstanding job of providing a document that talks about the factors that must be considered in this request. What must the members of that governing body consider going forward? I see Joe shaking his head. He remembers that because it's almost like a checklist as you read down through the list. And I think that we might benefit. If you notice the language here, you'll notice that it still would give us great latitude going forward on any request as to whether or not we actually decide to take it, whether we decide not to take it, or what the terms are of that. And this could take a number of different avenues. This could be simply just, these are general governing ideas on how to proceed with this. We could put this together in a SOP, standard operating procedure. We could actually codify this. So I wanted to kind of start that conversation tonight. You all should have the document now to take a look at this. I know historically this goes back. We've had, Mr. Feuerborn, correct me if I'm wrong, but I know we've taken over lift stations in the past, and we've taken over some streets in various parts of the city as well. Isn't that correct?
That's correct. And I also remembered that we have helped with getting a pool in, but we did not take ownership of it. A little bit in reverse, but we had to do a whole lot of the same background work when Stonegate did their pool. We actually provided the legal structure for them to do a CID down there.
Thank you. And like I said, we want to consider not only the individual request, but as you look at the factors of consideration, is the infrastructure within the scope of a natural municipal responsibility? Certainly streets, lift stations could be. I would argue that the cemetery probably is. If someone were to open an amusement park and didn't want to take it on, that one probably stretches the scope a little bit. What about the importance to the overall well-being of the affected neighborhood of the city? I think everyone would agree that's something we have to consider, because if a neighborhood deteriorates to the point that we either have to take it over or we are left with a tremendous eyesore or infrastructure deteriorated to the point that it will cost us a great deal of money in the future, or we'll have a neighborhood that's just in shambles. I think there's wisdom in looking at that beforehand and seeing what the risk reward is for that. Should we take that on, and what's our risk tolerance if the infrastructure is not adopted? Obviously the future burden on city services and finances. How much are we going to have to put into this going forward each year? Is that something we're willing to do? But do the other factors outweigh it? And then of course the likelihood or inevitability of the city inheriting the infrastructure involuntarily in the future. Great example of that is the monument signs that I just talked about. They were put up in a time where, those are really neat, but the structure was not put in place as to who would maintain ownership, and it became ours by default. I mean, it was brought to the council and we decided to do that, and I think that's a good thing. We certainly don't want future developers coming through and looking and seeing crumbled monument signs as they drive through our neighborhoods and thinking that we don't take care of our city. So that's all I have. I was just hoping somebody would kind of look through this and give some input. Mr. Burke.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I absolutely like number 2. As I was thinking about this, I thought, well, that would be a must for me, that whatever it was would need to be brought up to city standards or the code standards. So that's excellent. This is kind of a question to help me understand why these things happen. Example, my mother lives in a development in Independence. It's 65 and older, and they have control of their streets and their pool, and their everything is done through their association. What is the benefit to a neighborhood to have private streets and then years later come and decide that's not a good benefit anymore? Why is that something that developers choose to do?
Mr. Zura, you want to take that?
Thank you, Mayor. I'd be happy to address that real quickly, and this will be from outside experience from the city as well. A lot of times what we're seeing with it is if it's private street ownership, they're able to enforce declarations of covenants, conditions, and restrictions that would prohibit parking on streets, which is a great benefit to the association if they're going to control street side parking and allowance for ingress and egress. What I have also seen is deferred maintenance that goes too long, where the streets are their responsibility and they get all the benefit of being able to maintain control over those streets, but then they don't put the funds back in order to repave, or all they come back in to do is overlay, chip seal, or whatever insertion they want, and then they realize that it would take a huge amount of their ongoing budget in order to be able to allocate towards streets alone or a special assessment. In the prior experience that I've had, the city did in fact end up taking it over, but required the entity to escrow funds that would be the equivalent of, I think, half of a repaving within the subdivision.
Other elements that make it attractive to them on occasion are the infrastructure and signage requirements that would be on them. Sometimes they like more, and sometimes they don't want as much. As an example, Foxwood Springs has no sidewalks. Sidewalk would have been required when those streets were built. Second item is about every 100 feet, if you've driven through Foxwood Springs, there's a stop sign, even if it's in the middle of a road with no road going to it just to slow people down. They can do that because it's not city infrastructure.
Follow up, if I may. This is an example. Let's say if the Raymore Old Town decided to change the way they've structured things and decided, okay, we as a group no longer want to have no sidewalks, no curbs, guttering, things like that. What would the city do to do something like that that are not private streets already, but they had an MOU? I mean, would that be a totally different ball of wax, or would that be similar to some of these other groups?
Well, of course, we have installed sidewalk in some locations in Original Town. Certainly, if they came to us and they petitioned, it would take a whole turnover and different philosophy for over there. But in some cases, some of the things that they may ask for, we would probably be looking at putting those items into the CIP. Now, there is a Original Town plan that is in place that they had considerable input in, up to and including the design of the park, that we have to take into consideration before we do anything. So we'd also want to be honoring that as well. But yes, it would be a little bit of a different view from the city's standpoint.
Thank you. I was just trying to think of something that would be similar but yet different at the same time that's in our locality. Thank you.
Mr. Moorhead.
Mr. Burke, to follow up with that, to give a very close to home example, there's a community here that was developed back in the late 60s that Raymore was too small to provide the infrastructure for the development. The developer wanted to build deeper in instead of starting at 58 Highway, and so it was to the advantage of the developer to take over the road at that time because the city of Raymore could not. Later, the city kind of grew into it, and the circumstances changed.
Mr. Ullman.
Thank you, sir. And to dovetail off that, I think we see that in various forms as we progress into the future. I think all of you would agree that in 2017, our city is a tremendously professional and efficient organization with very, very knowledgeable people behind it. You want to remember, to use an example of the Herald Estates lift station, the city was not nearly the size or the professional demeanor that it is now. The infrastructure did not exist. And to be fair, that was the only way to do things at the time. But the people that are handling that are not professionals. They are not very well equipped to do that. The same might be said for Morning View, and I don't know, but also you're basing your information at the time you make those decisions on the scenario as it is at the time. Maybe those people are in their 50s and the money's still coming in, but 30 years later, they're in their mid-70s and 80s, and they've had health problems, and their income certainly has not kept up with the pace of inflation, or today's costs. So again, I think that goes back to, I think we will see more of these going forward, and I think we will benefit from having at least some type of, at a minimum, a loose policy and policy considerations going forward.
Ms. Abdullah.
And I feel like sometimes that has to do with who are the members of that group at the time that community or that organization is formed, because maybe the people who started that had the qualifications and the knowledge to be able to be in charge of those things, and now they're not anymore, and then, it's left in the hands of people who don't really know how to handle it, and will admit that. So they're looking for professionals that know what to do to take over that service. Question, I was just wondering, I know you said these are kind of your initial thoughts. Have we done any looking into policies that other cities have?
I did not ask, but my recommendation, I know Mr. Townsend has a comment. My recommendation out of this would be, if the council would agree, to send this back to staff and have them maybe research that for us and draw up some, perhaps a proposed policy framework with the options of either standard operating procedure or codification, and we can look at it again in a future work session.
Mr. Fearborn?
We certainly could. We could look, as you said, sir, we could look at it from the standpoint of what are other cities doing in this regard. I would imagine, I cannot imagine there not being something out there. Other cities have experienced the same sort of growth that we have. Could get back with the city council relative to, does it appear that most of these are an operating procedure that brings it to the council, or most of them some form of code that the city council can refer back to, or is it a combination of both? And then what is, we could get with you as far as maybe a checklist of review, if you will.
Mr. Townsend, did you have any other comments?
Yes. Just from my own understanding and basis on this, I appreciate the bullet points here Mr. Holman put together. This would pretty much be for the older communities and infrastructure that predates the maturity of our staff processes and code today. And then the second part of that, current existing code kind of we would not necessarily see this for, infrastructure and development and things that are going in place in the past 10 years, or not to necessarily put a timeline on it, but just, so probably more older communities and any impacts from annexation.
The annexation point is excellent. We actually have, believe it or not, a couple of newer developments in town. Jeter Farms. All of the streets in Jeter Farms are private. Mike, is the water sewer infrastructure private as well?
No, but there is I think Adams Street is public. One of the north-south, and there's an east-west road that is. But a lot of the roads the homes are on are private.
The intent being, when that hits, the owners were actually hoping that it would build out much quicker and that there would be an assessment put onto the homes. They had done their homework and had realized what that special assessment needed to be to, on a regular basis, do those streets. The problem is, as many of you know who drive by there, for years and years and years, it was just the two developers' homes sitting down in there. And those streets are deteriorating. It has begun to build out now, but I don't know if they're gonna it'll be a while till they have full build out, and I don't know if they're gonna get there in time. It would not be a surprise to me if that much newer development came to us with this same problem at some point in the future.
Morad.
But I do see some instances, though, this could affect new development as well. I mean, you think of the grinder pumps that we've dealt with Creekmore, and I'm not wanting to pick on Creekmore, only that they're a new development, but any material change of the face of our community can change how property gets used. So, for example, we have a private golf course that could become public, no different than we've had a private cemetery go public. I mean, there's a lot of, anytime there's change, I think this policy could assist with that. And I'm very supportive of this policy. In fact, I think it's very, there's a lot of wonderful work that's already been done. But because one of the things that I have personally felt in some of our recent discussions is the fact that I worry that our discussions can become subjective, and that we start looking at a particular application and say, that appeals to me more than it objectively is appropriate for the city. And I hate the idea that we would ever look at a development or a proposal and say, no, I just don't want that. I have no reason, but I just don't want that. When if we set a policy, any applicant has an objective set of criteria that they can at least help construct their position to present to us, and it gives us an objective evaluation. I think Mr. Zur may chime in and say that in rare instances, we could even end up declining an application inappropriately or create problems as a result. So having this in place, I think, gives the city a degree of protection and some stability for any future applicant. So I'm very passionate about this. I think this is a good start. Love to see what the city can do with it as well.
Mr. Townsend?
Yes, I also agree. This is an excellent start, but I'm also concerned that we don't, I'm sure city code and our planning and zoning committee and permits and such, that we don't have a development or process where they believe that, well, I can go with the cheaper option now because the city will come and take it over in a few years. So as long as whatever we decide to do, it doesn't create that atmosphere and impression that, you know, our taxpayers eventually are going to take over this.
Mr. Holman?
I agree with your statement wholeheartedly, and I would expect, staff can correct me if I'm wrong, but given the age of our city and the growth of our professionalism, I would expect the bell curve to accelerate, and then at some point it reaches its peak and it decelerates because of things like lift stations. While we don't absolutely ban them, we try and discourage them as much as possible. It would be rare to see a development that would bring a lift station to us and we would agree to do it unless it were way out on the fringes, or in the case of annexation or something like that, where we just don't have the infrastructure to reach that yet. But you know, a lot of these places put it in because the infill of infrastructure around them just wasn't there at the time, and now it's caught up to that. But I think certainly staff has grown and our policies have grown in leaps and bounds over the years to provide us a great degree of protection against that. Now, I don't know that it's all perfect, but it's pretty good, I think. I think you're onto something.
Mr. Berenson, did you have something?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to quickly also thank Mr. Holman. I also like this, and I'm supportive of it. I like that we're considering the you know, the future burden on the city and its finances. I like that we're checking the risk reward, and you know, I think you and I had talked earlier about you know, the possibility of these lift stations failing and what that could, you know, that could be a catastrophe, and that could be very, very expensive. So I like that we're thinking ahead on that, and just want to say thank you for your work, and I'm supportive of the document as well.
This was just the stuff that came to me. I'm sure staff is going to make this. They're going to find things that I didn't think of. So it was a starting point, but thank you.
Okay. Anyone else? Okay. Well, we got the marching instructions on that one, so we'll move forward there. The next item is traffic control measures. Mr. Fearborn.
Thank you, sir. I am going to let Mr. Krass start with this, and then, well, on second thought, hang on just a second, Mike. To intro this, we have been As you know, the GEO bond calls for this evening, I'll call it Relocated Kentucky, since we don't have an official name, to go in. We have shared the plans for Relocated Kentucky, which is your, I believe, the third page of the PDFs that you have as far as the diagrams are concerned, and are pretty far along with that. What you will notice on the northern component of Relocated Kentucky is that we have to go into Belton. We have to have Belton's okay on this. There are a number of items on this that, to be statesmanlike, we want to include Belton in the discussions, but the fact is that we're actually going to be doing work in Belton, so they have to have the approvals on this. Mr. Crass will be going over to Belton to appear in front of their city council in work session next Tuesday night. Before we do that, we wanted to bring the latest and greatest to you all, and that will now lead to, I think that's a good enough introduction. Mr. Crass.
Thank you, Mr. Fairborn, Mayor and Council. Yeah, as Mr. Fairborn indicated, we've pretty much settled on the alignment that you see on the drawings there. We have coordinated this with the developers of the Galleria. We've tweaked the alignment per some discussions with them to hopefully make the west side of the Relocated Kentucky a little more developable. What you also in the drawings is you have what the northern end of Kentucky is going to look like as it, or proposed realigned Kentucky as it intersects existing Kentucky, where we've created a fairly defined right turn movement if you want to proceed south on existing Kentucky. The purpose of that is, if you Council will recall, one of the main reasons for this project was safety concerns, getting traffic to a traffic signal for those that want to make a left turn to go, or a right turn to go westbound and left turn to come into Raymore. So the primary focus of the traffic movement at that location is to direct a natural flow to the traffic signal. As part of the discussions with Belton and their staff did present this concept to their planning commission, they are requiring that some modification to the traffic control at 58 Highway and Kentucky Road be included as part of this project.
Interestingly enough, when we first proposed this project to them, they were adamant that they would have difficulty doing this if there was a traffic control modification at Old Kentucky and 58 Highway, which of course we're examining both now and in the future with the Cadence development going in. Their city manager, Ms. Barton, actually had to use the term, we find out with egg on our face that we were making an assumption of our Planning and Zoning Commission and our council that was absolutely not true. And so now we are coming to you to let you know that your City of Raymore's original proposal that there be access restrictions on Old Kentucky is exactly what our council and our P&Z are looking for. So everybody's on the same page. We just didn't know we were all on the same page at that time. Thank you, Mr. Crass, for letting me interrupt.
Okay. So the final drawing that was included in the packet is a series of what we are proposing is a series of raised medians within 58 Highway to create left turn bays, but also restrict left turn movements for southbound Kentucky and northbound movements out of what we'll refer to as the cadence development. And so eastbound traffic will still be able to make a left turn up to go northbound on Kentucky. Westbound traffic will be able to turn left into the cadence development. Obviously, the right turning movements are restricted, as well as either a left turn or a complete through movement between the developments. So again, with the focus to the traffic signal at relocated Kentucky, also the cadence development having access to the south, which gets the traffic to a traffic signal as well. We feel this will address all of the safety concerns at this intersection. That concludes my report. I'm available for any questions you council may have.
If I could, excuse me for just one moment, I'm sorry. We did do a count of the accidents that occur specifically at this intersection. We are unfortunately unable to get, without considerable difficulty, this information from Belton. So if someone is pulling out of the Cadence property and they are on the north side of the street, because you'll remember Belton still patrols that even though the whole street is ours, we are still seeking the accident information for that side of the street. The accident information just associated with the south side of 58. In 2013, there were 8 total accidents on our side. In 2014, there were 12 accidents on our side. In 2015, there were 15 accidents on our side. In 2016, there were 16 accidents on our side. So far in 2017, there have been 7 accidents on our side. For folks pulling out of the Cadence property, up to and including last Saturday, the accident was on the north side, because that's where they're getting hit as folks are coming from the east and they're not seeing them. So just for your information, a lot of accidents.
Mr. Moorhead, or Mr. Burke, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This page with the green S traffic control measures, I absolutely love. I really feel, since there is not very much driver education anymore, drivers need all the help they can get into deciding how to make a safe turn. And I think that's the design of that is awesome.
Mr. Moorhead.
Mr. Crastor, Mr. Fearborn, looking at the conceptual alignment sheet for the north side, I know that we, less than a year ago, put out an RFP to try to stimulate activity, bringing commercial development to this area. I'm looking at a lot of single-lane roads curving with center medians. If we're going to substantially increase commercial traffic on that, is that sufficient? Or because I would estimate that if we have a large-scale project go back there, we're going to have to dig up that road and expand it anyway. Should we be making that bigger in anticipation?
With the funding that we have available through the GEO bond issue, this was the maximum amount of road that we could do, but the developers knew that we had skin in the game to do this. It is expandable, but the developer would be responsible for that component.
I appreciate the key word, with the funding that we have. You had me at that. So I appreciate that. Just like I said, I just wanted to raise that issue, just because, like I said, if we get something large in there, especially a box store, that's not going to be enough for flow of traffic. But thank you.
Mr. Ullman?
Thank you, sir. On the drawing that Councilmember Moorhead just referred to, it shows the ADA sidewalk. Is that a funded part of this project as it stands, or is that something we would be adding later?
I believe the sidewalk is proposed, but the trail is not at this time. The intent of the trail was to connect at some point with Belton's Bellray connector, but that project has been stalled.
The reason I ask, and I think that's great that we're putting the sidewalk in there, and, you know, I'd like to see the trail go in at some point too, but I think the sidewalk is imperative. If you've driven north or south on Kentucky and you've seen people walking out there, there's no place to go other than somebody's yard if there are cars coming. And there are a number of people that walk up through there, they walk their dogs, and they play Frogger. It's just get out of the way of the cars. We're lucky we haven't had anyone hit up through there, so I think that's great. And like Councilmember Burke, I'm a big proponent of the raised median barriers. I've long said that we needed to close off the against the grain turns here in the intersection. This is going to do this. This will reduce some public safety load on our police as well as the Belton police as well. And what, Joe, you were referring to is a term of engineering the decision-making out of this, and it's a good one.
Mm-hmm. Good point. Good point. Mr. Townsend, did you have something? No?
No, I was just reviewing the design options here, or design concepts, as well as just looking at the streets right now and experiencing the Dean and 58 light there with the new businesses on the weekends and weekday, and now we're going to have these medians in the middle, and at what point, I'm sure probably after the road is installed, we'll start doing some traffic study and counts to figure out traffic flows and mitigating light patterns and all that good stuff.
We are going to be proposing to the council in the budget following this one. And as a matter of fact, it is part of the formalized agreement with Belton that we are going to conduct a comprehensive traffic study that includes this area, goes further east, goes south past the TIF project number 4, because there may be some traffic relief that can be realized there as far as a secondary light. And we'll go all the way west to where the Belton/MoDOT traffic study ended coming east. So, and whoever gets the RFQ for that particular study will be required to be very familiar with that traffic study so that we can be doing things in parity, if you will, with whatever they're going to be doing. Nothing's gonna, be careful here, Mr. Fearborn. Nothing is going to cure this problem until that bridge is gone and a better bridge is in.
You say that louder.
Yeah.
And we keep asking Belton for the money, and they just won't give it to us. I don't know why.
You say that again, please.
Anyone else? You know what? I was under other. I was going to bring this up, but it's kind of a follow-on to what we're talking about with the traffic control measures. One of the things I was going to propose under other is that the council consider a speed limit along 58 highway of 40 miles an hour from city limit to city limit. And before you start throwing things at me, I've talked to Mr. Fearborn, and we've actually discussed with Mr. Crass the potential for the Operation Green Light being easier to potentially accomplish with the coincidence of all of the lights through there and calming measures that just 5 miles an hour will provide to that area. And not only will it allow Operation Green Light to be, and I can ask Mr. Crass to talk about it if he'd like to easier to accomplish, but we also have the intersections of concern. 58 and Fox Ridge, we have a little bit of a site clearance issue that we've actually considered in front of CVS for folks going north, turning to the east, a potential no turn on red. Much like the same directional traffic at 58 and Kurzweil, or 58 and Lincoln, or right there at J Highway. Got a lot of names to that street. So we believe that, and I know that Mike has intended, if we do get into further discussion on this, to do a traffic study to see if that lowering just 5 miles an hour will relieve our cautionary look at 58 and Fox Ridge and the potential for removing the sign from 58 and J Highway. And then also accomplishing the potential of Operation Greenlight. And I would ask Mr. Crass if he has any comments about what we had discussed previously. If you'd had an opportunity to, I know it wasn't coming up tonight, so it's catching you kind of flat-footed, but it's kind of a follow-on with the traffic control measures.
Sure, if I may here. Operationally, I think lowering the speed limit will do a couple of things. One of the issues we have with the mobility along 58 is the number of access points and the number of vehicles that have to slow down to make the right turn. So having them at a slower speed will change the need, and as traffic moves, kind of that chain reaction you get as one car after another slows down in the queue. So that will certainly help there. The mayor pointed out, the reason for the no right turn at J Highway, which gets a lot of comments, is because of the speed. And there is not adequate sight distance. In what we look at is the intersection sight distance. As a car is traveling at speed on 58 Highway, can the car turning right visibly see that car approaching vehicle soon enough? And at the current geometric configuration, no, it doesn't meet that guideline. I'm not sure if lowering it to 40 miles an hour will completely alleviate that or not, but it'll certainly get it closer. It will certainly also help there is a minor, to a lesser degree, a similar sight distance issue at Fox Ridge and 58 Highway. So lowering the speed limits there will certainly help with that as traffic continues to grow on 58 Highway.
And one of the things, too, the point I wanted to make is that, as you know, as you come out of the 35 into the 45, people are accelerating, which also contributes to that potential for not being able to judge what the speed of the vehicle is. If we have 40 constant through there, there's not that speeding up and slowing down issues that might cause judgmental issues for the traffic approaching, and that was one of the other reasons that I'd seen it. Did you have something, Mr. Fairborn? Mr. Moorhead.
I'm not going to throw
And Belton
anything
has
at
it
you.
for you.
I'm going to thank you for this. I've never had a lot of residents complain to me, but occasionally somebody will ask, especially somebody new in town. But driving through this town, that is kind of something I always feel, because my office is on the far east side of town, and I'm always having to see whether Chief Zimmerman's team needs to be paying attention to me, and I've had people comment about that too, that's really, in their opinion, the only reason why we do it. But you get that weird starting and stopping. I mean, when you're going west and you get past the post office, it's like the start of a NASCAR race. Everybody's waiting for that start line so they can all of a sudden punch it. And yet we have just as many dangerous turning points after the increase of the speed. So to me, I think just creating that regularity, I think people would appreciate that. I mean, politely put, between the two curves, everybody's driving 40 anyway. I think if they're looking for the police cars, but they're driving 40. And so I like the regularity of that. I think people would appreciate that more. And again, the safety concerns as well. So you're not getting anything thrown at you. We're glad. Thank you for raising the issue.
Mr. Holman, did you?
I would agree. I think we'll benefit from the consistency. Two of the zones, you're giving up 5 miles an hour, but one zone, you're picking up 5, and you've got consistent speed all the way through. I think in addition to the people that are actively paying attention or know what the speed limit is, you have an equal number of people who are just driving 35 through the whole section, impeding traffic a little bit that way. So I think we would see, or would hope we would see, a more continuous flow of traffic at normal traffic speeds throughout the length of the city based on this. So I'm in support of it.
Mr. Abdelgawad?
I was just going to say, my concern is with the middle of that S-curve area where it's 35, and the bump to get from a parking lot into 58 Highway is so significant that people can't pull out quickly. And so I mean, I feel like sometimes people are making dangerous decisions when traffic's going 35. I would be a little frightened if that was bumped up. I know it's only 5 miles an hour, but I think the way some of those parking lots bump, like from Sonic or from like Dollar General store, some of those right there in that part of town really are significant. And so I'm a little worried about that. I'm not so concerned with lowering the speed limit to 40 otherwise.
Anyone else? So if you don't mind, I'd like to see the,
We'll put something together in the form of a study, sir.
okay, that'd be great.
Sorry, so if we look at that, is there a way that we can smooth that transition in some of those places where there is a significant bump?
Not without significant grade changes to the highway.
Right.
And that was the challenge with that, especially, like, as you mentioned, Sonic and some of those, they're just so low below the road that there's really not, because if you lower the hump, then the drainage from 58 then goes into those parking lots, and like flooding Raymore Hardware would be bad. So there is some geometric issues there. There are some things we could look at. I can't speak to the areas west of the curve, kind of that central area there as you get past Casey's in that area, but east of there, when you get past the Baptist Church, there is an accident history at Washington and some others that we may want to look at. Although we raise the speeding limit there, perhaps put some advisory speed signs in there, some cautionary speed signs. They're not statutory, but you can put some like the yellow caution on the outer road, where it suggests the speed limit moving through there, just because some of the sight distance issues there.
So we're going to raise the speed limit, but ask them to drive slower anyway?
I
don't understand.
Mike's not describing it correctly. What my concern with it is that we originally talked about was, what about negotiating the turns? And so, because those can feel a little bit funny at a 40 mile an hour, where right now they're at 35. So more precautionary signs as you're going into the turns on both of those. Is that correct, Mike?
Yes, sir.
And it'd be interesting to see if there is that history at Washington, if it's not contributive from the 45 to 35 that occurs there, and people just haven't made that transition yet. Okay. Anyone else? If not, then we'll go on to fiscal year 2018 budget.
Sir, if the council has anything that they want to discuss on the budget, it is on for this meeting, and it will be on for the 16th, and the public hearing is scheduled for a week after that.
Okay.
We have also put onto the agenda, thought it was a really good idea, Mr. Icky proposed that with the council's okay, we will actually have the opportunity at next week's meeting, which would have normally been the public hearing at the first reading, that we have the opportunity for public comment on the agenda, not the formal public hearing, and then at the second one, we also have the public hearing. That way, folks could comment on the budget twice.
Not a bad idea. Cindy, were you going to throw that up on the screen from what we had done previously so that folks can kind of see what's up there? I know that there have been previous discussion on the unrestricted fund balance. Were there any questions or comments about any other portions of the budget at this time other than directed at the unrestricted fund balance that we had talked about previously? I didn't think there was. People had already had an opportunity to look at the budget. Now, I will go ahead and open discussion on behalf of Mr. Kellogg, who's not here with us tonight. He had actually asked that there be some consideration by staff about bumping up the schedule for the permeable crosswalks like we have at 58 and Huntsman. You know, what, I think his concern was, well, if we accelerate the schedule on that, what does that do to traffic at those intersections, and what kind of traffic flow limitations might that cause for Public Works if they were to accelerate that program? So we were kind of, he and I were kind of kibitzing over the phone as to whether or not you need to bump it one more intersection in this coming fiscal year as in addition to the schedule that you have. I don't know, how many do you have, Mike, scheduled for 2000 FY18, do you know?
I believe it's 6, or is, yeah.
6 intersections? Wow, that's a lot already. I don't know, what's the average cost on one of those? I know Huntsman's kind of an anomaly. It was a fairly large project with the island and all. And most won't, except maybe the entrance to Silver Lake. But most of the others will be just the actual sidewalk itself and not include an island in the middle. That was the one thing that Mr. Kellogg had asked me to bring up tonight to discuss, if the council would be open to that.
Somewhere close to $14,000 or $15,000 a location, just rough math.
Have you had an opportunity to consider, since we last talked, about what kind of disruption that might cause if you added, say, 2 more to your schedule for 2018 as opposed to, and how many are there altogether, by the way? How many had we intended to do?
Well, and if we do the south side where we did the 7, and then the other north side, there would be 14 locations. So I think, you know, we can obviously stage them one at a time so there's not a big traffic impact. It's also would be done by contract, not Public Works staff. So it's really a matter of what council would want to fund as, if any, expansion to this program.
If they, on your existing program, did they intend to do all at the same time? Would that be an ongoing thing, or will they do one, complete it, move on to the next one, complete it, move on to the next?
I think just for traffic control, it would have to be staged that way.
At one at a time?
One at a time.
Okay. I don't know, is there, Ms. Abdelwad?
Just a question, I'm wondering, so if we were to add more to this year and reduce the number next year, how might that affect the cost? Would we end up paying more per intersection possibly next year if it's a smaller project?
I don't think the cost is going to vary significantly. I mean, it's pretty much the same amount of work, other than whatever happens with the normal construction inflation.
I just know we've talked about some projects, if it's such a small project, it's hard to get people to even bid on it, you know? So I was just wondering, if we add too much this year and next year's project is too small, would that be something we would need to consider?
I really don't think so with this type of project. As I recall, they were extremely tight bids for the Huntsman sidewalk, which is usually a pretty good indication that it's a stable amount of work. So the council is aware the total for this particular project for these 6 intersections is $114,465.
So had you planned it to be 6 this year and 8 next year to complete it, since there are 14 altogether? Is that right, Jim or Mike? Were there 14 altogether?
I think that's right. We'd have to look at this, because I don't recall if every one of these has a cross street, sir. But yeah, the intent was to do the south side and then look at what we could do on the north side the following year.
Okay. All right, Mr. Holman?
I'm not opposed to this at all, but we really caught Mike flat-footed on this one tonight. If we assume that Councilmember Kellogg will be here in our next work session in 2 weeks, perhaps Mike could take a look at this a little bit more and bring us back kind of if there's any impact or benefit, or if it's just neutral, which kind of what it sounds like on the surface, and then Kevin can make his recommendation on what he thinks we ought to do. Might be a good way to go. We've got the opportunity to do that.
I like that. Okay,
We'll dig into it.
thank you. Anyone have anything else at this point? Not hearing anything, so we'll
Very good,
push
sir.
forward to the next
We'll
work session.
bring it down on the 16th again.
Okay. Sounds good. That's all there is on the agenda, except there might be another other. Is there another other that anybody wants to bring up at this time? Okay.
Mr. Mayor, I move that we enter into executive session to discuss litigation matters as authorized by RSMO 610.021, subsection 1, and personnel matters as authorized by RSMO 610.021, subsection 3.
Second.
Motion's been made and seconded to move into executive session. Could I have a roll call?
Thank you, Mayor. Councilmember Townsend?
Present.
Is that a yes?
Yes.
Councilmember Burke?
Yes.
Councilmember Berenson?
Yes.
Councilmember Abdelgawad?
Yes.
Councilmember Holman?
Yes.
Councilmember Moorhead?
Yes.
Very good.
We can just stay in here. I'll
It's all right,
make
sir.
sure that Mr. Carteret gets his.